So I'm going to start the next session, which is a session on careers. So for those of you who are joining for the first time today, or perhaps you've come back from a session in the morning, good afternoon and welcome to the School's Climate Summit, which is a part of London Climate Action Week. My name is Meyer, and I am a co-chair of the London Climate Action Week education group and organizer for today's summit. It is fantastic that we're now going to be discussing careers, which is something that's come up in the context of green jobs, in particular green jobs and the recovery for much of the morning. I'm very pleased that we have an extraordinary headline address today by Rain Newton-Smith. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the session chair this afternoon, who is Simon Levey, who is the communications manager at the Grantham Institute for Climate Change and the Environment at Imperial College London. And Simon will do the honors introducing the headline speaker as well as the panel to follow. So Simon, over to you, please.
Super. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's session about careers at the London Climate Action Week Schools Climate Summit. Thank you, Melanie, for the introduction. I'll just repeat for anyone who missed it, in case you're just joining us now. It's been a fantastic day of sessions about greening your school, collaborating with your local community, and curriculum reform. And following this, we have a session on finance, closing statements, and a performance from the Brit School, which all sounds really exciting. You can check out the programme online and catch up with the videos, any of this great content you've missed on the website. Do ask your questions for the panel in the Q&A box, where our great tech support will be helping us to get them answered. There's also a chat function for you to talk to each other. And if you're on social media, then why not send a message to London Climate Action Week, hashtag LCAW 2021, hashtag Schools Climate Summit, and tell your followers something useful you've learnt today. In this session, we'll be asking what makes a job a green job? What training do young people need for a green job? How far does government funding go for green jobs? And how can you support young people in their career choices? We're going to open this session with a keynote from Rain Newton-Smith, Chief Economist at the Confederation of British Industry, that's the CBI, with government announcing its 10-point plan committing to removing 10 megatons of carbon dioxide and 2 million extra green jobs by 2030, launching a green jobs task force and even more money for jobs in nature recovery and conservation. The CBI and businesses that are their members are going to be an important part of this conversation. They have 190,000 businesses employing nearly 7 million people and around 1/3 of the private sector employed workforce. So they're an influential voice. I understand that Rain was unable to join us today in person, but we're going to have a video with Rain's address. It's going to start very shortly.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to be talking to you about how careers can really help to transform the world and how we tackle climate change. And I really want you to leave this session energized about the opportunities ahead. I think when we start to think about how we tackle the twin emergencies we face in the world of climate change and declining biodiversity, it's so easy to get drawn into pessimism and to feeling that there's nothing that can be done about it. But I really want to open your eyes to a world of opportunity. I truly believe that tackling climate change and biodiversity is something that the UK can truly lead the world, but it's only going to happen if we bring together teachers, students, businesses, government, and we all work together on this shared challenge. I'm Rain Newton-Smith. I'm Chief Economist at the CBI. The CBI is the main voice of British business, and I spend most of my time, when I'm not embarrassing my own children, talking to business leaders across all the regions and nations of the UK, across all different sectors. So one moment I'll be talking to the CEO of Microsoft UK. The next day I'll be talking to the leader or the finance director at a British company that probably made the swings in your own school playground. You probably, if you're in secondary school, don't use them so much anymore. But talking to a British manufacturer that really leads in some of that manufacturing, and they're based in Yorkshire. And then the next day I'll be talking to a renewable energy company based in Cornwall. And really my job is to help them understand what's happening in the UK economy, but also to really be their voice in thinking about government policy and how it needs to change. And so the other half of my time is spent talking to politicians, those in power and those who aren't, and civil servants in government departments who are really making things happen across our government and our society day to day. And what really has come across to me in the past few years is how united and how lucky we are in the UK that there is a real political consensus on the need to tackle climate change. And there's a real consensus across the business community. And really what the aim is now is about how do we deliver this. And I truly believe we all play a role in that, but I don't think we've even started to think how much our world, how much our everyday lives is and needs to change if we're really going to tackle climate change. So I want to take you through a little bit of recent history. So 2 years ago, the UK passed a law where we committed to reducing our carbon emissions, that's the greenhouse gases we're emitting into the atmosphere, to net zero by 2050. And that means by 2050, the UK will have to make sure that any carbon emissions we are still producing by then, and the main aim is to try and reduce those emissions as close to zero as possible by 2050. But we'll still be producing some at that stage, but we'll be using other technologies to actually take that carbon out of the atmosphere. And some of those are really basic technologies like reforestation, planting trees, which are very good at taking carbon out of the atmosphere. We're thinking about our peatlands in Yorkshire and in many places around the UK, in rural areas up on high moors where we have peatlands, which also capture a lot of carbon from the air. Or more sophisticated technologies like carbon capture, usage and storage, where there are energy companies like Drax that are really looking at this. And again, it's seen as an area where the UK can really lead the world in developing that technologies. So I think really importantly, we were the first major economy to make net zero by 2050 the law. And it really is the law. And I don't think our thinking has really kept up with that, whether that's thinking about our schools, our communities, or the way we lead our lives. And look, I know many of you are students and you'll be impatient. You will say that 2050 is way too late. We need to be seizing the opportunity now. But I want to tell you as an economist and as a scientist, that 2050 is really ambitious, but what's important is that we have clear targets on the road to reducing our emissions to almost zero by 2050. And I'm pleased to say in the UK, we have the UK Committee on Climate Change. We were one of the leading countries to set up the right frameworks to think about how we tackle this. And we have this committee of scientists who advise the governments on what are the targets that they should adopt. They recommended the net zero target. Businesses backed it. We, the CBI, joined forces with the NGOs to call on the government to back that net zero target. But recently, the UK Committee on Climate Change has said that in our 6th carbon budget, we should have an ambitious target to reduce our emissions by 78% on current levels by 2035. So that might sound a little bit closer to you, still probably feels like miles away, but it does set the road ahead. And importantly, it brings the UK into line with the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was an agreement a few years ago where countries from around the world agreed with the UN's target to ensure that countries adopted net zero targets by 2050 so that we could keep the overall amount of warming from where we are now to within 1.5 degrees. And that is seen as critical in fighting climate change. But how we actually meet these ambitious targets is going to take huge transformation. We need to really think about where our energy comes from. And that's both our energy for transport, for how we heat our homes across the whole system. we need to continue the journey to renewable energy. And actually, it's something the UK has been really successful so far. We've been one of the most successful countries in the G7 in reducing our energy needs to rely on renewable energy. So now almost half of our energy needs come from renewable energy. We need to continue on that journey, but it's actually been a huge success from the UK. We've developed offshore wind, we've developed solar energy, and that's been really, really important. But we need to think about travel, electric vehicles, trains, how we move around the country. We need to think about how we heat our buildings, our homes, our schools, our hospitals, and how energy efficient they are. So if your parents tell you to turn off the lights when you leave a room, if they tell you we're not going to we're going to turn down the heat, it's really on this drive to be more energy efficient. So you should listen to them. But obviously there are more fundamental things that you can do. And I think one of the other things that's important to be positive about is the UK isn't the only country that has adopted a net zero target. Actually, if you take the world as a whole, over 70% of our emissions are now covered by a country which has a net zero target. If we by 2050, importantly, China has a target of 2060, but that does take us up to over 70% of global emissions. But those are the targets. Now we need the action plans to turn this into a reality. And here in the UK, the Prime Minister set out his Green Industrial Revolution, which was a 10-point plan. But I think we, the CBI, and as a business organisation, we really think there needs to be a lot more detail in that plan. And we are determined to set out some of the detail that we need. And so we've set out our own 10-point plan to really set out the blueprints we need across different sectors to really achieve that. And I want you to think about what is the blueprint that you need to see in your own school, your own organization, because it's only if every school, every business, every NGO, every community really thinks about how they make their local area reduce their carbon emissions, or the organization that they are part of, to net zero. We all need a target and a credible plan at that level to deliver that. And so when you're thinking about your careers and your jobs, every single career and job and place of work eventually will need to be net zero. So you need to make sure it aligns with our transition. But I think there are also huge opportunities, and the idea that actually the transition to net zero means there won't be enough jobs for people isn't right. There are really important questions about how we make the right transition, how we support people who are maybe currently working in fossil fuels, how we support a transition into renewable energy. Most of companies now who work in the energy sector think of themselves as energy providers, not necessarily focusing on fossil fuels. They know they need to transition away, but we need to see that transition across all sectors and communities. But if you're thinking about your future career, don't think of this as just in terms of construction and what are the infrastructure we need to build, but there's so much about it. If we think about our homes, we need to design our homes, buildings and schools so they're energy efficient. They also need to be resilient to climate change. We know climate change is already happening here in the UK. If you speak to any farmer, they will tell you they see climate change on the ground every day in the way they farm right now. We know temperatures are going up. Our buildings need to cool themselves more efficiently, but we need to do that in a way which is renewable. We need to think about where that heat, to how we heat our buildings, where that comes from. We can think of some innovative technologies like ground source heat pumps, which literally suck some of the heat from the underneath the Earth's soil to heat a building. That requires maths and science, but there's a huge part about design. And I think designing buildings and transport systems so they appeal to people, so that it's easy for people to want to walk or to cycle rather than getting in their cars. That really is about systems change. And how do we make sure that electric vehicles, which will be the future of transportation, are more comfortable, that they're integrated with our mobile phones, that the mobile phones we use don't require so much data, and those data requiring important ways of cooling data. Actually, when you're processing data, that creates a lot of heat. If you've ever used a laptop, you will feel some of that heat in your laptop. We need to think about that at the systems level. But importantly, the batteries that are in electric vehicles, we need to make sure that those batteries, the materials they use, can be reused. So there's so much thinking that needs to go on across the whole spectrum. And thinking about psychology, sociology, agriculture. How do we encourage people to save in pensions that are climate friendly, that are really part of this transition? How do we encourage people to eat less meat in their diet? How do we farm with sustainable methods of production that don't harm biodiversity, but also actually help to create a net positive economy? How do we have the right regulations in place to ensure that companies think about not just their role in reducing carbon emissions, but also improving biodiversity and their impact on the environment? That takes economists like me, it takes bright minds from across the whole spectrum, and a real connection with human beings to really make that happen. So I just think there's a huge variety of careers out there, many non-traditional careers as well. And what I would say is every job needs to be part of that transition to a low carbon and nature positive economy. So when you are thinking, what am I asking all of you to do, whether you're a student, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a leader in a school or in an NGO, I want you to look up the UK Committee on Climate Change. You should understand where our carbon emissions in the UK come from and the role that you can play in reducing them. That's number one. Number two, for every major decision, your school, your NGO, your future study or place of work, for every major decision they are taking, is net zero at the heart of that decision? Is it part of that transition to a low carbon economy? And how is it creating a nature positive economy? If you're thinking about your career and your future, think about the systems change we need to deliver to really have a low carbon transition and a nature positive economy, and make sure that it's at the heart of it. But finally, don't be afraid to act. I think it's only by each and every one of us grasping these opportunities with optimism for the future that we can really create the world we want to see. And we've seen in this pandemic how people can really work together and create vaccines overnight or over a period of months that have really managed to save certainly the outlook here in the UK. And of course that needs to be rolled out globally, but I think we've seen what is the art of the possible. So it's undoubtedly the biggest challenge that we're facing. But if we all work together and really understand that we all need to play a part in that transition to a net zero economy, we can absolutely make this happen. Now is the time to act.
Hi again. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay, thank you to Rain and her CBI colleagues for that message. There's some interesting conversation going on in the chat. Unfortunately, Rain won't be here to answer some of your questions, but certainly it's great to hear that there's business community and political consensus on meeting the current the target of net zero emissions by 2050. I think from having attended this conference, there's certainly more than enough enthusiasm in the room from people attending today's summit to really match, or maybe more than match, what is being suggested there. I think it would be great to hear now from some about some of the solutions and about more than just what people can do as individual actions. I'm now going to introduce myself briefly and the panel that we have today. In this session, I have a couple of slides which I can't work out how to bring up. because I'm not a usual Zoom user.
Simon, if you click share screen and then you can select your PowerPoint presentation to.
I don't see anything that says share screen. Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Okay, I still don't know what you can see.
We can see it without.
You can.
It needs to be in the slideshow if you can.
Yeah, correct. So I will briefly tell you a bit about myself. I think we're all here today. We know about the climate change impacts, just some representations of those there. And I think it's been covered in Rain's presentation as well, what's needed to avoid this Paris Agreement target of 1.5 degrees global warming, so to steeply reduce our carbon emissions to zero. It's an important context that we're having this summit this year, in the year that the UK and Italian government hold the COP26 negotiations, because this is the opportunity for everyone, all the nations concerned, to ramp up what they promise they're going to do about climate change, as well as delivering financial solutions and climate solutions for the developing world, as they say. At Imperial College, where I'm based, we are working on various research solutions, technologies, including things like solar panels and zero carbon transport and energy solutions, which we heard a lot from in Rain's presentation there, as well as nature-based solutions, and looking at the benefits of, for example, replanting forests and peat lands, and of changing our diets. An important part of the conversation, which we're going to touch on in this session as well, are behavioural solutions to climate change. And a lot of these have been hot topics in the summit so far today. At Imperial College, we are often asked these questions for several years now: what can I do? And we wanted to answer people's questions. We wanted to answer them in a way that felt achievable to people. So we spoke to our researchers and we designed a resource. It's a leaflet, and it's an online resource that people can use. We wanted it to not just focus on what individuals can do. I've seen a few questions in the chat so far today, lots of different sectors, different people asking what can they do. We think these are a good 9 ways to start. First of all is make your voice heard by those in power. So recognizing that we are all more than just an individual. Some solutions that we're all familiar with, so eating less meat and dairy, cutting back on flying, I've seen that mentioned in the chat a few times, leaving the car at home, and reducing your energy use and bills. Respecting and protecting green spaces, we've certainly felt that more keenly whilst we've been under the COVID pandemic. And then some that are more applicable to the adults on the audience here, but also to some young investors, to spend and use your money wisely, to cut consumption and waste. We've certainly heard a few people talking about food waste, for example, is a big emissions source, and to talk about the changes that you make. At Imperial, we took this leaflet to some of the Fridays for Future protests, and we've been talking to members of the public about what they can do. What else is it that we do at the Grantham Institute? We're based at Imperial College, which is one of the world's top science and technology and business universities. What we do at the Grantham Institute is we are responsible for training students and staff in communicating about climate change. We kind of exist to ensure that everyone is able to not just do their research, but have a bigger impact with it as well. And that involves training our PhD students and our masters and undergraduate students in how to do that. I think an important point I want to show you here is because we're going to be talking about careers, is that you don't have to just be a climate scientist to have an impact on climate change. Our PhD program includes people from all these different departments across the university, where we're training them in how to go out there and be future leaders in whatever it is they choose as their career. We run a master's program in climate change management and finance, which has only got more popular since the pandemic. And you can see here that business and management, economics, engineering, technology, finance, accounting, mathematics was mentioned earlier, computing, and science and medicine are also really excellent, both sources of students for us, but we anticipate that students will leave our program and go on to become well-rounded, climate-aware and leaders in these fields, and know how to make a difference on sustainability and greening the businesses they go to work in. We also hold a similar program that's free for undergraduates to attend, and it's, as you can see, there are students from all walks of life attending these courses. They all recognise the necessity of knowing about climate change and sustainability. Being Imperial College, we are also supporting people with innovative business ideas based on their science, and we recognise that people don't come into university fully formed, ready to be innovative inventors, but that we also hold programs to train people in how to start a business, how to market your own business, how to survey your audience and find out what it is that what products they're looking for, what needs they have. And these are really going to be essential for for us to all have products and businesses and services in the future, in the coming years, that we can use that are low carbon, that help us to be low carbon, and that reduce the emissions from various sectors. I just wanted to show a couple of examples there, but students of ours who are doing excellent work. As a university, we're also creators of knowledge. It's important to us to research and to, many people come into university thinking of research as a career. And it's important to us to be able to create at Imperial College the students who are going to lead their research fields in the future, and working on solutions such as decarbonising buildings and working on solutions for campuses such as your school's campus that were discussed earlier, and how to engage with local authorities and local decision makers as well as part of the research. We seek to inform people, and that's part of what we're doing here today, being part of London Climate Action Week and the Schools Summit, as well as doing outreach and kind of things that are a little bit off-piste. You wouldn't necessarily think of researchers writing poetry or creating a carbon neutral beer, but these are all ways of that we have identified of kind of educating and training our students in how to be more than just researchers and how to have an impact beyond just their narrow field. I think that's it. That's all I wanted to say about the Grantham Institute. But I'm happy that if it comes up, and I'm using my chair's privilege again, but if we have questions that I can answer from that point of view, then I'm going to do that. I'm going to jump in and do so. I'm going to now introduce our other panel members. Each panel member has been asked to speak for a maximum of 10 minutes about their green and sustainability career guidance for pupils in a fast evolving education sector, as well as the potential need for strategies, development of any unmet skills and careers pathways. A reminder to add any questions into the chat, into the Q&A box and chat in the chat. Our first speaker is Kathryn Lennon Johnson. Kathryn is an entrepreneur, an author, a TEDx speaker, a teacher and a consultant with 18 years of experience in behaviour change. Kathryn says she's a passionate believer that social value and the 3 pillars of sustainability should create ethical profits and longevity that benefit us all. And that includes the thousands of tonnes of CO2 that are produced each year by our built environment in the UK. To tackle the shortage of construction skills and attract the next generation into construction, Kathryn recognised the need to celebrate the built environment as a source for good. She's going to speak to us today about her work as the founder and director of BESS, Built Environment Skills in Schools. Kathryn, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everybody. And love to see a message pop up from someone I know in the chat. So hiya. Thank you so much for all being here today. I absolutely won't be talking for 10 minutes because I'd much rather take your questions. But to tell you a little bit about me, Simon's given you the summary there, but I don't know anything at all about the built environment technically. I have no idea how stuff happens. What I care about is how the built environment affects us as human beings, the impact that it has on the choices that we make, the limitations that put on our lives. And I think for me, one of the real key things about this, and I've seen a couple of these questions in the Q&A, and I'd love to come back to sort of cover these in a bit more detail later on, is really issues around poverty and how all of these things seem very grand and fabulous and easy to do, and wouldn't it be lovely if, but actually for a number of schools and students and communities and neighbourhoods, just getting through the situations that we find ourselves in now are really the priority. And I think for me, as Simon alluded there, across those three pillars of sustainability, so although this week is all about climate and the environmental side, which is one of the pillars, the other two pillars are the social sustainability and the financial sustainability. And for me personally, the social sustainability is something that really matters, and that's the work that I do with young people. I'm part of the Careers and Enterprise Company, so I work across 4,000 schools, senior schools, helping young people to recognise that their perspective on the built environment is valid, it's relevant. You are allowed to have an opinion on something that you didn't build, you didn't design, you didn't pay for. It's okay to think that it's not good enough and to want to do more and to do better. And a great deal of that comes from lived experience of how the built environment has helped shape your lives. I've no doubt, to the people on this call, teachers, careers leads, enterprise coordinators, everybody else who's here, I've no doubt that you know these facts and figures already. But for anyone who doesn't, air pollution drops IQ points by an average of 10. Living in poverty, existing in poverty, surviving in poverty, drops IQ by a further 5 points. So young people in poor accommodation, in poor school buildings, not at all poor schools, could be great, fantastic schools, but poor school buildings where the air pollution is a real issue, and perhaps where they're facing personal issues of poverty, can be 15 points behind their peers who don't have the same issues. And that to me is utterly unacceptable, and something the built environment can and should be addressing. And when I say built environment, I mean that as the product of the construction industry. So construction, engineering, infrastructure, etc. Those are the process to create the world, and then the environment is the product of what we exist in. And we've all spent a lot more time in our houses over the last 18 months or so than we planned to, and we have really experienced the limitations of those. So that's the work that I do. I work with hundreds and hundreds of construction companies. I'm sure many of you schools have great links with construction companies, and perhaps some of those are the big contractors. And that's phenomenal. Obviously, they're a huge part of the industry, but the industry itself is actually 350,000 companies, most of which are SMEs and micros, local, national, but all sorts of expertise and disciplines and ways to solve problems. So that's really a lot of the work that I do, linking you and them together to see how we solve these problems and to inspire young people to come and make the world better. We recently held a conference, and this is not the time for a pitch, but we recently held a big virtual conference called the Festival of Construction, which was based all around the COP26 climate change themes. And I will absolutely share a link in the chat so that you can pop over and see some of those videos, because they may very well be relevant for your students. It's people from all sorts of disciplines taking those 5 key COP26 themes, people working in that, being able to offer really specific advice that you can guide and advise your students. So that's just a little bit about my context. I don't know anything technically about construction. I'm a behavioral psychologist. So my work is about choice architecture. It's how we take people through the choice process. And I think that is obviously in relation to careers, that's a really important thing for students, but actually it's something for all of us. And making choices about what we do to impact the climate, to impact sustainability is something that is relevant to society as a whole. So that's really where I'm coming at this from, and I'll stop talking now and back to Simon.
Thank you, Kathryn. Some excellent reasons there, I think, to persuade our pupils, our young people, into what we might term a green career. I think we'll come back later to see. Certainly, a question I want to ask is what makes a job a green job? So I wouldn't necessarily have thought construction, but maybe we'll explore that in the Q&A. I'm now going to introduce you to our second panelist, Dr. Kris Meyer. Kris is a neuroscientist who works with environmental scientists, policymakers, conversation NGOs to support them in communicating more constructively about controversial environmental topics such as climate change. He's a visiting lecturer in the Department of Geography at KCL, and over at UCL, he's part of the Policy Commission on Communicating Climate Science. He's also the producer of an award-winning documentary, co-creator of children's radio series Climate Explorers, and a participatory theatre piece, The Justice Syndicate. He speaks regularly on BBC radio and TV about polarisation in society and why fake news can be so believable. Kris is going to talk to us in this session about why more people need to see all jobs as green jobs. Over to you, Kris.
All right, thank you, Simon, for the introduction. So a lot of the work that I do these days sits actually under UCL, specifically the climate-related work sits under UCL, something that we call the Climate Action Unit. And in the Climate Action Unit, we work with a lot of people in different professions, be they sort of civil servants working in government departments, people working in local governments, members of parliament, members of the House of Lords, business consultants, teachers, people who work in the finance industry, and so on. And what we're observing in all of the projects that we are engaging with people in these different communities is that there are a lot of people of goodwill who want to do things around climate change, who want to do things around sustainability and biodiversity and better farming practices and so on, but who are really struggling to figure out how they can do that within the narrow constraints of the job roles that they have at the moment. So what a lot of the programs are that we do with them is help them work out how to bring climate change into the jobs that they're already doing. So for a business consultant, it is how do we make climate change the part of the conversation with the senior leadership of the companies that we are working with? How can we put that on their agenda so that they start building it to their business models, their strategies, their decision making, and so on? And that really has opened up the sort of the view to me that in the future, all jobs are going to be green in a certain way, up to a certain degree. All of us will have to find the way that we are bringing climate change into the professions that we might end up doing. To give a couple of examples, we're working at the moment with councils across the country who are trying to implement specific projects that are part of the local climate action plans that the councils have started to implement as a result of declaring a climate emergency a few years ago. And what all of these council officers are trying to do is figure out what it is that they can do within the part of the system that they are occupying, whether they're working in the communications team in the council or in the social and mental health team in the council, or whether they're working with schools, or whether they are working in the finance or in the internal decision-making of the council. They're all wondering how could we start making better decisions so that we can help to get our council to net zero by 2030, 2035, many of these councils have set themselves an ambitious target 10 or 15 years in the future. So what we help them to do is unpick those challenges and find out how can they really almost redefine the way they think about their jobs at the moment, such that they start seeing the levers that they have for bringing about change in a different way from how they were seeing that before, perhaps. And that means sometimes, or often, very often, it means bringing people with different expertise together. Because if you're working in a certain situation, in a council, in a communications team, you probably would benefit from access to someone like Simon, who works as communications manager in a university. And so bringing people together from these different communities and helping to build the relationships between them is one of the things that we are helping to do, and that is opening up the way that people are seeing whether a job has some climate related component to it or not, or some climate action related component to it or not.
Okay.
So, yes.
Super. Thank you very much, Kris. We've had a few questions coming in already on the chat, and number one, top of the list, what is a green job? Kathryn, Kris, what is a green job? Define it for the people.
I think Kris just touched on it there. It's anything that includes not just thinking about things, but actually action about things. But I know this is something that the three of us have discussed today, that by othering jobs, by saying this is a green job and this is not a green job, we actually run the risk of splitting the workforce almost, so that you've got the people doing noble, worthwhile things and everybody else doing a core business. And actually, you know, to achieve the climate objectives that we've got, everything has to be a green job. Everything must have green at the heart of it, not least because we all know that alongside physical health pandemics and all of that kind of thing, financial cycles, booms and busts are a natural part of the world, an inevitable part, I suppose, not natural, of the world that we're in now. And if we make green jobs other, they become at risk of being the first jobs to go in tough times, and we cannot afford that. We need this to be absolutely embedded, to be business as usual, to be core. So I would say all jobs are green jobs, or they should be green jobs.
Yes, and I would add to that a couple of examples. If you go back 10, 15 years ago, climate change was actually an issue that people talked about and started to do things about, and it was all framed in a language of sustainability in those days. And what a lot of big organizations did was they started a sustainability department somewhere in the organization. But by making this its own job thing that was given that responsibility of looking after sustainability, those parts of the company or the organization usually were sidelined. They ended up not having a lot of influence within the organization, within the company. And so a lot of the sustainability work that has been going on for 10, 15 years hasn't made that much of a difference to how a company works. There are notable examples, exceptions to that. So there are companies who have taken that really seriously. So if we're thinking of green jobs as something that happens in one part of the economy and not in another part of the economy, we're really not going to be tackling the climate emergency here. We need to make sure that it stays mainstreamed and it becomes more mainstreamed for more and more business roles and organizational roles. Two examples. We're currently working with another organization in bringing people from the finance industry, so people who make investment decisions, together in conversation around how does a change to a regenerative financial system look like, where your financial system helps you to achieve positive, climate positive aims, nature positive aims, rather than destroying it, what it's doing at the moment. And that needs to become the job of every person in a finance company. It cannot be the role of just a few of them within these big organizations, where then the remainder of them keeps on doing what they are doing. Another example is I was recently talking to people from a big architectural company. They had a small sustainability department. The people from the sustainability department were struggling. They said, we got everyone in our organization to sign up to pledges left, right, and center, but now we don't know what to do next. And the reason is that as an architect, as a young architect, you have certain specifications, design specifications. You need to work fast, you need to work efficient, you need to generate value for money for your clients. All of those things architects know how to do. How to design for climate change, how to design for energy efficiency, for changing weather conditions, that's not part of the skill set at the moment. But until we know how we have to do those things, until our designers know how to do those things and combine them with the other constraints that they have, which is be efficient and offer value for money and so on and so forth, we're not getting anywhere with what we want to do as an organization. So we want to do stuff. We've all promised that we'll do stuff, but it's the skill set that we really need to develop here. And that's the same across the board of all the sort of job roles that we are speaking to. People are trying to figure out how to do it.
When we, the three of us met earlier and we talked about what different careers, what could be a green job. We talked about lawyers, we talked about builders, universities, ambulance, police, fire, procurement. We talked about food and chefs and accountants and IT. The numbers of different jobs was pretty much endless. And I think that really speaks to the skills that we're giving people. But what about the transferable skills? I think what you've been saying so far is that in this really dynamic area, what people are going to need is soft skills. Do you think there's any, do you think is enough being done by educators about those skills?
If I jump in, I certainly with the schools that we work with, transferable skills is absolutely something that is a big part of PHSE. It's a big part of civics. It's a big part of just student development, work readiness, and things like that. But there's always more, and actually, you know, there's a big responsibility on employers of all kinds to come and help schools understand what that might be, what that might look like, because there's no point developing these things in isolation and finding that they are not actually what's needed. And the world is changing very, very fast right now. So young people in education, maybe starting their GCSEs and things next year, Key Stage 4, it could be 5 years before they come into the workforce, and the world may be moved on another 10 steps by then. So I think there are lots of the cross skills, but communication skills, IT skills, digital skills, certainly maths and good finance, all of those kind of things. But I think it's a responsibility of all of us to define what those transferable skills are, and to really make sure that if it's something that's important to our industry or our business or our sector or whatever it might be, to actually help schools with that.
Thank you, Kathryn. Kris, what are the common skills that you see?
So the ones that we think are most needed are collaboration skills across silos of expertise. So what the current educational systems are doing quite well is create experts in a certain area. So you do your secondary school, you go to college or university, you become better and better at the thing you're doing. You start a job, you really turn into an expert while you are doing things on the job. And that then comes often with something that we see, which is that you grow into a mindset, and that mindset prevents you from then working with someone who has grown into a different mindset. And actually, I don't know if this is simply by virtue of the people that we're working with, but I would say that younger people so far are better placed to do that cross mindset working that we are trying to engender. So we feel often that the young people that we're working with get something and start collaborating in a way that we feel slightly older people who are in more powerful positions at the moment have really trouble with. And hopefully, this is one of the things that I would recommend everyone keep that mindset of working with people who are experts in their own right. Keep that going as you are becoming your own expert, as you are climbing up the ladder of whatever organization you are working in, because you will need it more and more the more you advance. And at the moment, a lot of us are actually losing that ability as we are becoming set in a certain way of working.
Thanks, Kris. I'd just like to remind everyone in the audience, it would be great to have some more questions for our panel in the Q&A box. And perhaps actually, something that it would be nice to see is if you're aware of schools programs that you'd really like to share, someone you think is doing a great job, or a program, or a kind of a piece of advice that you give out in your area that it would be great to share with other members of the audience, then type that in the chat, and you can maybe pick up some tips as well. So in his last answer, Kris touched on something that I think is really interesting. We, of course, are talking about lawyers and engineers, and these are fantastic green jobs, potentially, if you've been to university. I wonder if well, I think we all know you probably don't need to have gone to university to fill a job where we have a massive shortage, for example, who's going to install all of our heat pumps that we're going to need to decarbonize our buildings. Do you have anything to say about kind of vocational courses, apprenticeships, sort of where the roles are for them? Maybe Kathryn.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many apprenticeships available, and I think there are maybe some barriers perhaps to still be overcome in terms of the distinction between apprenticeships and university degrees, and which is better or worse or whatever it might be. But even with the introduction of the T-levels, I think that's something that is becoming more recognized as being a practical technical qualification. I'm here speaking about the built environment, and I'm sure there are similarities and differences in other sectors, but I know that as an industry, construction is something where you learn constantly. You are required to learn constantly, and so even if you don't necessarily, if you've got students who are perhaps not loving the academic side of life, whatever job they come into, they will probably be required to keep learning, keep developing, keep growing, and that's not necessarily going to be big academic qualifications. It's going to be very, very practical skills sometimes, and that is great because, as you say, Simon, we need the people who can actually do the things, not just think about the things. And to Kris's point about the collaboration, we need to create the solutions, and we need people to install the solutions, and we need people to monitor the solutions and to talk about the metrics of the solutions. So actually those conversations, that collaboration is really important. Supporting apprentices, I think, is really important. The 20% off the job requirement that's compulsory for apprentices is a real opportunity. I think it's such an untapped space to really help students become more than simply good at their job, which is obviously very important, but to become good humans. And so that's something that I know a lot of educators will want to work with employers to do more and more on that. But yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many vocational qualifications, and maybe as that picks up popularity, there'll be more still. I know in some of the research that I've seen, and the teachers may have seen this too, that many students dismiss apprenticeships because it trains you to do a specific job, and they prefer university because it's training you on how to learn and how to bring all of these skills together rather than how to be a specific job role. And perhaps again, that's something that we push back and start to shape, because these qualifications have got to work for us as educators, as employers, and as residents of the planet.
Yeah, and I can perhaps add that in some of the projects that we are working, we're seeing a lot of other job roles that aren't necessarily the university-based ones. For instance, Cornwall County Council is working with their fire brigades, their ambulance staff, their police, so the first responders to disasters, to help them prepare for the changes that will come to the region in terms of flooding and heat events, etc., where people will need to prepare different responses to these kinds of effects of climate change that will come our way over the next 5 to 10 years increasingly. So there are these other jobs on which climate change touches as well. There is, for instance, we're working in Wales with the farming community. There is a lot of issues. The farming community is aging at the moment. The average age of farmers is increasing, has been increasing over the last couple of decades. But actually, when it comes to an influx of young people who are interested in regenerative farming, in organic farming, in sustainable farming, there is actually that influx is starting to happen. And interestingly, it's a majority young women who are interested in that as a job in the future. So the kind of jobs that are currently out there are changing in response to how people in different generations are thinking about what a certain job should be. And that means that there will be a role for everyone, whether you go to college or university or apprenticeship or vocational training, you will find your place in that landscape, basically.
Thanks, Kris. Just to summarize some of the comments in the chat, there was a big support for the soft skills, communication skills, team players, for example. Adaptability is another one I've heard, and entrepreneurship, and being, you know, we can't all go into a business. Maybe we can start our own business. Great. Would love to see more careers resources on things like this. Some links from Marlene, recovery, Green New Deal, coronavirus recovery, from the GLA, and degree level apprenticeships advertised as well, from banks to airlines. The commenter would like to see more from construction and engineering firms. Perhaps this is something that we can pass back to the CBI. It would be great to involve RAIN in future discussions about what the big companies can do. A comment about National Careers Advisory Service being slow off the mark, and that's a shame. I thought it's interesting to know, Kathryn, that you obviously go into schools, you go into education establishments, and you run workshops and you run additional extracurricular sessions with people. What would you recommend for maybe some young people who are listening whose schools don't offer that? Anything particularly in London?
Oh, I think there are thousands of things. And to the person who was asking about extra resources, we have just obviously specifically for the built environment, we have tons of those things that we can absolutely connect you directly into. For schools that don't, I think there are, one of the advantages, benefits, if that's the right term, of the last 18 months of weirdness is that lots and lots of content has become digital. So there's lots of things that students can access while still protecting all of the safeguarding, while still keeping your students safe. There is a huge amount of virtual work experience. We offer it, lots of people offer it, that students can do. Some of that is date specific and requires whole classes. Some of that is individual led by the student themselves, and safeguarding is all built into that. So I would say that there's so many resources out there. The challenge, I guess, is sifting through them. But if a school doesn't do that, if a student is interested in that, and it's construction of the built environment is something that you are possibly interested in, please do get in touch or drop me a line, because I absolutely can send you a chapter and verse on those.
And Kris, if you had a tip for any employers watching and listening to this,
it would be to realize that your organization is not going to survive in the way that it is working now. So it will change. The change will come whether you're expecting it or not. And it is to open up for your teams, the people that you're working with, the possibility to bring sustainability and climate change and all the other issues, biodiversity, into the way that you're running your business, and allowing the people that express an interest in this to explore this as part of their job description and to bring this into their job role. And rather than opening up, perhaps designate it, perhaps make sure that your lawyer team in your organization does take climate change seriously, does take net zero seriously. Those kinds of things are needing to happen very soon.
I think we should also not pass up. There was a comment, Kris, that you maybe were stereotyping older people for not being so maybe down with climate change and down with technology. I wonder if perhaps we flip that on its head and say, what about young people who maybe don't have access to the technology that we might expect, for example, for them to go on YouTube and look up careers advice or the kind of things that Kathryn's talking about? What are there maybe some low-tech ways that young people in schools can access this kind of information and advice that doesn't require so many gadgets?
That's a tough question. That's the flip side of what Kathryn said, that a lot of these things have gone digital. The flip side is that then some people don't have access to them anymore so well. So I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer than go to your school in that case and see if there still is the paper file version of the digital resource. And besides that, beyond that, there is a task for governments, for schools, for businesses to make that access available to everyone. That's part of the bigger societal shift that needs to happen.
Yes, actually, I suppose that's a challenge that can also be lobbied against universities. Certainly something that we've found with our public engagement and our outreach activities over the last year is that whilst we assume they can all be digital, actually in some areas in our community engagement, we've been investing more time and more people actually organising face-to-face events, small bespoke face-to-face events, and listening to people more closely. And it certainly takes more time, and it certainly takes effort to maybe take something that was physical, went digital. Not everyone can come to it, and it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that I think is going to cost us in resources and time and money, but it's essential for involving the whole of society that I think the onus should be on us to do it. Kathryn, are you?
No, sorry, that's just.
Super. I'm going to ask the last couple of questions. Oh, there was a comment about low tech. I'll have a read of that in a second from the chat. I'm going to ask our panelists one more question. I'm going to ask you, are you optimistic that we are in time to do everything we need to do, or some of the things we need to do?
Don't have any choice. It's got to happen. It's got to happen right now. And the people on a bell curve of adopters, there will be people that will come to it slowly, but it's got to. I think, if I may offer a couple of specific ways perhaps that schools can do that. First of all, as a personal note, there's a lady called Sarah on here from Solutions for the Planet. If your school doesn't use Solutions for the Planet, use Solutions for the Planet. It's a competition that goes across schools and allows kids to create amazing solutions for the planet. Absolutely phenomenal. And having been a judge on that a couple of years, the ideas that they come up with are just extraordinary. So do reach out and connect with Sarah. I think one of the things that schools can do to make sure that we're on time for this and that we get things done is to push some of this responsibility back to the network, the cohort of employers that you work with. Every school will have some of those. Obviously, if you're looking for more in construction and built environment, please drop me a line, because I'll happily plug you into hundreds and hundreds of them who want to help you. But look at the Gatsby benchmarks and start inserting the word sustainable or climate into those, and see if that slightly different lens helps you to just come up with some new ways, some new ideas, new thinking for it, and then reach out to your employers and ask them to help you deliver that, because they're the people that are going to need this workforce. They're the people that are going to be employing this, creating these jobs, solving these challenges, making this money, doing all the things that they need to do as employers. So for schools, don't feel like this is a challenge you have to overcome yourself. Put that to your employers, let them help you. But yeah, I think that's the way we're going to do this on time, is if we start collaborating, let's all come together and solve this problem.
And just to bring in that comment in the chat that I mentioned, a suggestion that actually there are plenty of people in schools who are not teachers, who are operational, who are working in various different areas, who can discuss sustainability careers with students. And that's a great way to maybe take advantage of the students' enthusiasm and to bring sustainability ideas to all of society. Kris, finally, are you optimistic?
Yes, in a gritty way. It's a gritty form of optimism, in the sense that we have to make it happen, like Kathryn says. But I do meet a lot of people who do want to make it happen. And especially in the UK, over the last 2 years, an enormous amount of things have shifted. Where 2018, the end of 2018 and 2019 were the year of the protests, and when the word eco-anxiety came into our public mindset. 2021 is rapidly becoming the year of action and really drastic action and drastic change. And we're seeing that all across the board, from local councils really putting their money where their mouth is and trying to change the way that they're working, to politicians and government in the UK, to the US government, to China making bigger steps. There's good news coming out of the way that the transition to renewable electricity, the technology, how fast that is becoming cheaper and more achievable to make that transition. So there is lots of news to make us hopeful, but we need to determine to make it happen.
Super. A really nice optimistic note, and I think that brings us neatly round to the end of the session. I wanted to thank you both, Kris and Kathryn. Thanks to Rain from the CBI as well for her message earlier. Also to Melanie and Martin, Jamie and Paula for organising the excellent sessions today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the Schools Climate Summit. Thank you.